I thought my volcano orange McLaren was a trophy, an escape from a life of shadows and lies. Then the flashing red and blue lights appeared, threatening to shatter my perfect cover and drag my hidden world into the light. The sound of the engine was my sanctuary, a low, throaty growl that vibrated right through the buttery leather of the driver's seat and into my soul. For most of my life, a moment like this, cruising down a sun-drenched suburban street in a volcano orange McLaren 720S, was the kind of thing I only saw in movies. But after years of grinding, of long nights and dangerous days in a world nobody knew I was a part of, this car wasn't just a car. It was a trophy, a tangible piece of evidence that I had made it. It was my one escape from the constant pressure, the lies, the weight of the badge nobody could see. I was taking the scenic route home, the windows down, letting the warm afternoon air wash over me. I wasn't speeding, wasn't driving recklessly. I was just being, enjoying the purr of the V8, the envious and admiring glances from people on the sidewalk. It's a strange thing, the attention a car like this gets you. Some people see success, hard work. Others see a target. I was just about to find out which kind of person was behind the flashing red and blue lights that suddenly filled my rearview mirror. My stomach tightened into a familiar knot. It's a feeling every black man in America knows, regardless of whether you're driving a beat-up sedan or a $250,000 supercar. It's the cold dread of being seen not as a person, but as a problem to be solved. I did the mental checklist. License, registration, proof of insurance, all in the glove box. My personal weapon was secured and permitted. My other equipment was well hidden. I pulled over smoothly to the curb, the McLaren's engine settling into a quiet, impatient idle. I killed the engine, the sudden silence feeling loud and heavy. The police cruiser, a standard Ford Explorer, parked behind me. I watched in the mirror as the driver's side door opened and an officer stepped out. He was a big guy, mid-40s, with a thick mustache and a gut that strained the buttons of his uniform. He walked with a swagger, the kind of walk that says he's owned this street since he was born, and you're just a temporary inconvenience. He didn't approach my window. Instead, he took his time, making a slow, deliberate circle around my car. He ran his hand along the carbon fiber spoiler, peering at the custom exhaust, his expression a mixture of awe and deep-seated suspicion. Finally, he appeared at my window, rapping his knuckles on the glass. I powered it down. "License and registration," he said, not as a request, but as a barked order. His eyes weren't on me. They were scanning the interior of my car, the custom Alcantara trim, the minimalist dashboard. "Good afternoon, officer," I said, keeping my voice level and calm. My training kicked in automatically. De-escalate. Observe. Comply. Never let them see you sweat. I leaned over and popped the glove compartment, retrieving the documents and handing them over. He snatched them from my hand. His name tag read Miller. He glanced at my license, then back at me. "Marcus Jones," he read aloud, a smirk playing on his lips. "This your car, Marcus?" "Yes, sir," I replied, my hands resting visibly on the steering wheel at the 10 and 2 position. "Quite a car for a Marcus Jones," he said, letting the sentence hang in the air, thick with insinuation. He looked from my face to my casual polo shirt, then back to the car. "What do you do for a living, Marcus? You a rapper? Professional athlete?" The stereotypes were so lazy, so predictable. "I'm in software development, officer," I said, sticking to my official cover story. He chuckled, a short, humorless sound. "Software. Right. You know why I pulled you over?" "No, officer, I don't," I said honestly. "I was driving the speed limit." "Your tint looks a little dark," he said, tapping the window again. "And a car like this, we get a lot of reports about vehicles like this being driven aggressively. We have to check these things out. Make sure everything's on the up and up." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." My internal alarm bells started screaming. This was no longer a routine stop. This was a power play. "Officer, am I being detained? What is the probable cause for asking me to exit my vehicle?" I kept my tone respectful but firm. Miller's face flushed a deep red. The smirk was gone, replaced by a mask of pure annoyance. He had expected me to be intimidated, to fold immediately. "I just told you. Suspicion. Now get out of the car, or I'll pull you out." I knew my rights. I also knew that sometimes insisting on your rights with a cop like Miller can get you a broken window and a face full of asphalt. I was on a delicate timeline for my real job, and an arrest, even a wrongful one, would complicate things beyond measure. So I complied. I opened the butterfly door and stepped out, standing slowly, making sure my hands were always visible. "Turn around, hands on the roof," he commanded. He gave me a rough pat-down, his hands lingering a little too long on my pockets. He found nothing, of course, but that wasn't the point. The point was humiliation. The point was putting me in my place. As other cars drove by, their drivers slowing down to gawk at the scene, I felt a hot surge of anger. I swallowed it down. Patience, I told myself. This idiot is just a bump in the road. "What's this?" Miller said. He had opened my car door and was leaning inside. He pulled out my gym bag from the passenger footwell. "It's my gym bag, officer," I said. He unzipped it and started rummaging through it, pulling out my workout clothes, my water bottle. It was a pointless, invasive search, and we both knew it. He found nothing and tossed the bag back inside, scattering the contents. Then his eyes lit up. He had seen something he thought was a gotcha. "This car has been heavily modified," he declared, pointing at the engine bay visible through the rear glass. "These aftermarket parts could be illegal. I'm going to have to inspect the engine." "Officer, those are all factory parts from the MSO division," I explained calmly. "The car is completely street legal." He ignored me completely. "Pop the engine cover," he demanded. I hesitated. My car was my baby. Letting this clumsy, aggressive man anywhere near its finely tuned heart felt like a violation. But I saw the look in his eyes. He was itching for a reason to escalate. Reluctantly, I reached in and hit the release button. The glass cover hissed open. Miller leaned over the engine, pretending to know what he was looking at. He poked at a hose. He tapped a carbon fiber panel. Then he did the unthinkable. He walked back to the driver's side, a greedy look on his face. "I need to make sure the vehicle is operationally sound," he said, his voice dripping with false authority. "I'm going to start it up." "Officer, that is completely unnecessary," I said, my voice losing its calm edge for the first time. "You have no right to operate my vehicle." "I'm a police officer," he snarled, puffing out his chest. "I have the right to do whatever I need to do to complete my investigation." He slid into the driver's seat, his bulky frame barely fitting. The engine roared to life with a press of the button, a furious, angry sound. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. My blood ran cold. This wasn't an inspection. This was a joyride. He was going to show the black guy in the fancy car who was really in charge. He revved the engine, the sound echoing down the quiet street like a gunshot. A sick, twisted grin spread across his face. "Officer, get out of my car now," I ordered. The tone was different. The agent in me was surfacing. He just laughed. "Oh, what? You gonna call the cops?" He put the car in drive, his foot hovering over the accelerator. "Let's just see what this thing can do." Before I could even process what was happening, he stomped on the gas. The McLaren, with its 710 horsepower, didn't just accelerate, it exploded off the line. The tires shrieked as they fought for grip on the asphalt. Miller was clearly not prepared for the raw, violent power. The car fishtailed wildly, the back end swinging out towards the opposite lane. He overcorrected, yanking the wheel with panicked force. The world went silent for a beat, replaced by the sharp, sickening sound of tearing metal and shattering carbon fiber. The brilliant volcano-orange body crumpled like paper as it slammed sideways into a concrete traffic barrier. And in that moment, as I saw my dream, my sanctuary, my hard-earned trophy lying in a broken heap, I knew protocol was out the window. My hand dove into my pocket, bypassing my personal phone, my fingers wrapping around the cold, encrypted satellite device that connected me to a world Officer Miller couldn't possibly imagine. The world snapped back into focus with the hiss of a deploying airbag. Steam and smoke billowed from the crumpled front end of the McLaren, the smell of hot metal, burnt rubber, and leaking fluid stinging my nostrils. For a split second, I was frozen. Not by fear, but by a white-hot, crystalline rage that threatened to consume every bit of my training. He didn't just wreck my car, he defiled my sanctuary. He took the one thing that was mine, a symbol of a life I'd clawed my way up to, and broke it out of pure, pathetic spite. Officer Miller stumbled out of the driver's side, clutching his head. The airbag had knocked the wind out of him, his face pale and slack with shock. The swagger was gone, replaced by the wide-eyed panic of a man who knew he had just detonated a bomb in the middle of his own career. He looked at the mangled supercar, then at me, his mouth opening and closing like a fish. No words came out. My thumb moved with practiced speed across the keypad of the satellite device. It connected instantly. No ringing, just a secure, silent link. "This is Agent Jones," I said, my voice low and devoid of all emotion. "Code 8. Hostile LEO contact. Federal asset has been compromised." I rattled off my location. "Requesting immediate containment and a special agent in charge." The voice on the other end was calm, a disembodied, acknowledged ETA 15 minutes. I disconnected the call and slid the device back into my pocket. 15 minutes. An eternity. I walked toward Miller, my footsteps crunching on shattered carbon fiber. I didn't run, didn't shout. I moved with a deliberate calm that seemed to unnerve him more than any outburst would have. "Officer Miller," I said, my voice like ice. He flinched. "You're being detained. Do not move. Do not touch your radio. Do not touch your body camera." The shock on his face began to curdle back into belligerence, a last-ditch effort to reclaim authority. You can't detain me," he stammered, pointing a shaky finger. "I am the police. You're under arrest. For obstructing." He trailed off, his brain unable to concoct a plausible charge. "For obstructing what?" I asked, stopping a few feet from him. The power dynamic had been inverted so violently it was almost palpable. "Your unauthorized use and destruction of my private property. Your gross misconduct and abuse of authority. Right now, the only thing you should be worried about is how you're going to explain this to the people who are on their way here. And trust me," I leaned in slightly, "they are not your friends." His eyes darted around, searching for an escape. He saw the onlookers, their phones all pointed at us, recording. He saw the wreckage. He saw the cold, unwavering certainty in my eyes. His hand started to inch toward his radio on his shoulder strap. "Don't," I warned, my voice dropping to a near whisper. "That would be a very poor decision." He froze. In the distance, a familiar sound began to cut through the afternoon haze. Sirens. Not the single, distant wail I was expecting, but multiple, converging, and getting closer with alarming speed. Miller heard them too, and a flicker of hope, of relief, returned to his eyes. His backup. His brothers in blue were coming to save him. I sighed internally. This was about to get much, much messier. The initial call to dispatch would have been for a simple traffic stop. The second would have been a frantic, "Officer needs assistance," or vehicle accident involving a cruiser. Except his cruiser was untouched. This was going to be a confusing scene for them to roll up on. 2 more squad cars screeched to a halt, boxing us in. 4 officers jumped out, their hands hovering over their holstered weapons. They saw the scene, their shaken colleague, a wrecked supercar that looked like something out of a blockbuster movie, and me, a black man in a polo shirt, standing over Miller as if I were the one in charge. Their minds filled in the blanks with a story I knew all too well. "Hey, get away from him," one of the newly arrived officers shouted, already drawing his weapon. Miller saw his chance. His victimhood was restored. "He assaulted me," he yelled, pointing at me again, his voice cracking with manufactured fear. "He crashed his car, and he attacked me." The lie was so audacious, so utterly shameless, that I almost laughed. But there was no time for that. All 4 officers were now advancing on me, their expressions hardened. "Sir, get on the ground, now!" The apparent senior officer, a sergeant with gray hair and a grim face, commanded, his own gun now pointed squarely at my chest. I stood my ground, raising my hands slowly to show I was unarmed. "Officers, your colleague is the one who needs to be restrained," I said, my voice calm and steady. "He is a danger to himself and the public." "I'm not going to tell you again. Get on your knees," the sergeant barked, his finger tightening on the trigger. "Hands behind your head." I looked from his eyes to the barrel of his gun, to the other officers fanning out to surround me. They were jittery, amped up on adrenaline, ready to follow their sergeant's lead. Miller was standing behind them now, a smug, triumphant look replacing his panic. He thought he had won. He thought his lie, backed by the power of his uniform and the blind loyalty of his colleagues, would bury me. He had no idea he was just pulling the pin on a grenade he couldn't possibly comprehend. They were all making the biggest mistake of their careers, and the clock was ticking down to the moment they would finally understand that. The sergeant took a step closer, his voice a low growl. "Last chance, pal." The air crackled with a tension so thick I could taste it, a metallic tang of adrenaline and bad decisions. 4 guns were trained on my center mass. A chorus of angry, confused voices was yelling commands. Miller, the architect of this chaos, was hiding behind his uniformed wall, his face a mask of vindictive righteousness. This was the razor's edge, the moment where my life was entirely in the hands of a jittery sergeant who had already decided I was the villain in this story. My training screamed at me to comply, to get on the ground and survive the encounter, to let the system sort it out later. But my mission, and the very authority I represented, demanded I hold my ground. "Sergeant," I said, my voice cutting through the noise with a calm authority that seemed to momentarily surprise them. "My name is Marcus Jones. I am a federal agent. I am ordering you and your men to stand down. You are interfering with a federal investigation." Ace, the statement hung in the air for a second, causing a flicker of hesitation. But the sergeant, a man likely used to being the highest authority on any scene he arrived at, quickly recovered. He let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "A federal agent? Son, I've been a cop for 25 years. I've heard every line in the book. Now for the last time, get on the ground before I put you there." Miller's smug expression widened. "He's lying. He told me he was in software. He's crazy." I kept my eyes locked on the sergeant. I knew this was my last chance to de-escalate before things turned violent. "Sergeant, I am not repeating myself again. Your officer, Miller, committed a felony by operating my vehicle without my consent and destroying it. That vehicle is a piece of government property. You are now all complicit in obstructing a federal agent and tampering with federal evidence. Every second you continue to point your weapons at me, you are digging yourselves a deeper hole." My words, the sheer audacity and specificity of my claims, planted a seed of doubt. The sergeant's eyes narrowed. He was calculating. On one hand, he had the word of his fellow officer. On the other, he had me calm, unyielding, and speaking a language of liability and jurisdiction that made street cops nervous. The other officers glanced at each other, their bravado wavering. It was in that moment of hesitation that the sound arrived. It wasn't the sound of more police sirens. It was deeper, more menacing. A rhythmic thump, thump, thump that grew louder by the second. Everyone, including me, looked up. Dropping out of the clear blue sky were 2 sleek black helicopters. They weren't news choppers or police air support. They were unmarked, military grade, and moving with a predatory speed and precision that screamed federal. They didn't circle. They descended. One began to hover directly over the scene, its downdraft kicking up dust and debris, whipping our clothes and making the officers shield their eyes. The other landed with breathtaking speed in the middle of the intersection 50 yards away, its rotors still spinning, as a side door slid open. Out poured 6 figures. They weren't police officers. They were dressed in black tactical gear, helmets with smoked visors, and carrying short-barreled rifles held at a low ready. They moved with an unnerving synchronicity, fanning out and creating a perimeter around the entire scene, their movements economical and lethal. Local residents who had been recording on their phones scrambled back into their houses. The entire street fell silent, save for the deafening roar of the helicopter blades. The sergeant's face had gone from red to ashen white. His gun, which had been pointed so confidently at my chest moments before, was now lowered, forgotten. He and his men were frozen, looking like children who had stumbled into a cage with a pack of wolves. A 7th figure emerged from the landed helicopter. He wasn't in tactical gear. He wore a sharply tailored gray suit that seemed immune to the rotor wash. He was older, with silver hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He walked past the local cops as if they were statues in a park, his eyes fixed on me. This was Special Agent in Charge Reynolds, my direct superior, and a man who made even the most hardened criminals break out in a cold sweat. He stopped in front of me, his gaze sweeping over the scene. The wrecked McLaren, the stunned local police, Miller trying to make himself small behind the sergeant. He looked at me, a single eyebrow raised in a silent question. "Compromised, sir," I said simply. Local LEO became overzealous. Reynolds gave a curt nod. His eyes then shifted to the sergeant. The full weight of his authority, backed by a dozen heavily armed agents and 2 helicopters, pressed down on the man. "Sergeant," Reynolds's voice was quiet, but it cut through the noise like a surgeon's scalpel. "Who is in command of this fiasco?" The sergeant swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing. I am, sir." "Then you are the one I'm holding responsible," Reynolds said, his tone dropping several degrees colder. "You and your men will hand over your firearms and your badges to my agents. Now, you will then place your hands on your heads and await further instruction. Any deviation from this order will be considered an act of aggression against the United States government." The officers stared in disbelief. They were being disarmed, on their own street, by men in black uniforms who had appeared out of nowhere. Miller looked like he was about to faint. This was a nightmare from which he couldn't wake up. Slowly, reluctantly, the sergeant unbuckled his holster and handed his weapon to one of the tactical agents. The others followed suit, their movements stiff with shock and humiliation. Miller was last, his hands trembling so badly he almost dropped his gun. With the local police neutralized, Reynolds turned his attention to the real problem. He walked over to Miller, circling him slowly, much like Miller had circled my car just minutes before. "Officer Miller," Reynolds said, his voice deceptively soft, "Agent Jones's preliminary report states that you illegally commandeered and subsequently destroyed a $250,000 federal asset. Is that an accurate summary?" Miller's mouth opened, but only a choked squeak came out. "Because," Reynolds continued, stopping directly in front of him, "we have satellite footage of this entire intersection. We have audio from Agent Jones's comms. We have dozens of cell phone videos from these good citizens. And in about 10 minutes, we will have your body camera footage. So, I suggest you think very, very carefully about what you say next. Your career is already over. We're just deciding now whether your freedom is too." He leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper I could barely hear. "But before we get to that, there's a much more pressing issue. The item that was in the car. Where is it?" My blood ran cold. The item. The whole reason for the mission. The McLaren wasn't just a car. It was a transport vessel. Hidden in a secret compartment, shielded from all but the most invasive scans, was a briefcase. And inside that briefcase was something that could not, under any circumstances, fall into the wrong hands. I frantically scanned the wreckage. The compartment was in the passenger side door panel, the same side that had taken the brunt of the impact. The door was bent, mangled, and hanging half open, and the secret compartment, its latch broken in the crash, was sprung wide open. The briefcase was gone. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the sudden, roaring silence in my ears. The briefcase was gone. The entire operation, months of undercover work, the lives risked to retrieve that package, all of it was vaporizing before my eyes. My gaze snapped from the empty compartment to the chaotic scene. The local cops were disarmed and humiliated, but they were contained. The onlookers had been pushed back. The only variable was the crash itself. The window between the impact and our perimeter being established was maybe 5 minutes, long enough for an opportunist, long enough for a disaster. Reynolds saw the look on my face. His icy composure didn't break, but I saw the shift in his eyes. The mission had just escalated from containment to recovery. "Jones," he said, his voice a low growl. "Talk to me." "It's gone," I said, my voice tight. "The compartment was compromised in the impact. Someone must have taken it." Reynolds's jaw clenched. He turned his gaze on Miller, who was now trembling visibly. "Officer," Reynolds's voice was dangerously calm. "During your little joyride and subsequent crash, did you see anyone approach the vehicle?" Miller shook his head numbly, his eyes wide with terror. "No. The airbag. It was all smoke. I just got out." This was useless. We were wasting time. "Sir," I said to Reynolds, "the witnesses. The people with the phones." He nodded, already one step ahead. "Get their phones," he commanded to two of the tactical agents. "Legally or otherwise. I want every frame of video they shot from the moment of impact. Now." The agents moved with ruthless efficiency, approaching the stunned onlookers and firmly demanding their devices. While they worked, I started doing my own scan. My mind switched from field agent to analyst. A thief wouldn't stick around. They'd grab the prize and melt away. I surveyed the street. Suburban houses, manicured lawns, a small strip mall a block down, an alleyway between two of the houses. My eyes locked onto that alley. It was the quickest escape route, the fastest way to disappear from the main road. "I'm checking the alley," I said to Reynolds, already moving. "Take 2 men," he ordered. Two of the black-clad agents detached from the perimeter and fell in step behind me, their rifles held at a low ready. We moved quickly, a tight 3-man formation. As we reached the mouth of the alley, I saw him. A kid, couldn't have been more than 17, wearing a hoodie and jeans. He was trying to pry open the reinforced clasps of the sleek black briefcase with a rock. He was so focused on his task he didn't hear us approach. "Drop it," I said, my voice level. The kid yelped, spinning around. His eyes widened at the sight of me, flanked by 2 commandos who looked like they'd stepped out of a video game. The rock clattered to the ground. I just found it," he stammered, holding the briefcase up like a shield. "It fell out of the car. Finders keepers, right?" "Son," I said, walking slowly toward him, my hands held out in a non-threatening gesture. "You have no idea what you're holding. That case is the property of the U.S. government. Hand it over and we can forget this ever happened. You walk away, no one knows your name." He hesitated, his eyes darting between me and the briefcase, the potential payday warring with the very real threat standing in front of him. My heart was pounding. If he refused, if he tried to run, my men had orders to secure the asset by any means necessary. This kid's life was hanging by a thread. "Please," I added, my voice softer. "Just give it to me." After a tense eternity, he seemed to shrink. The fight went out of him. He slowly placed the briefcase on the ground and pushed it toward me with his foot, then raised his hands in surrender. "Good choice," I said, nodding to one of my agents. "Get his details and let him go. Make sure he understands the meaning of discretion." I picked up the briefcase, checking the seals. They were scratched but unbroken. Relief washed over me so intensely I felt lightheaded. I walked back to the main street, briefcase in hand, just as one of the agents approached Reynolds with a tablet. "Sir, we've reviewed the footage. It's all here." I handed the briefcase to Reynolds, who took it with a grim nod. We both watched the tablet. The video was shaky, clearly from a cell phone, but the picture was clear. It showed the McLaren slamming into the barrier. It showed the passenger door springing open. And it showed the briefcase tumbling out onto the grass verge. A few seconds later, the kid in the hoodie darted out from behind a hedge, snatched the case, and sprinted down the alley. And then, clear as day, the footage showed Officer Miller, having just climbed out of the wreck, looking directly at the kid, watching him steal the case, and doing absolutely nothing. He didn't shout. He didn't pursue. He just let him go. Everything clicked into place. The lie about me assaulting him. The desperate attempt to shift the narrative. It wasn't just to cover up the joyride. He saw the kid take the case, and in his panicked, self-serving mind, he must have thought a story about a violent, crazy black man would create enough chaos to distract everyone from the fact that he'd not only destroyed a supercar, but also allowed a mysterious package to be stolen right under his nose. He wasn't just a bully. He was a coward. Reynolds turned the tablet so Miller and the other officers could see the screen. He let the damning footage play in silence. The color drained from Miller's face, leaving a pasty, sickly gray. The other officers looked away, their expressions a mixture of disgust and dawning horror at how badly they'd been played by one of their own. "Officer Miller," Reynolds said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of a death sentence, "you are under arrest for destruction of federal property, obstruction of a federal investigation, filing a false police report, and perjury. My agents will be transporting you to a secure federal facility. I assure you, where you're going, you won't have to worry about fancy cars for a very, very long time." He paused. "As for the rest of you," he said, his gaze sweeping over the other 3 cops, "your department's Internal Affairs Division will be hearing from my office within the hour. I'd suggest you find some very good lawyers." 2 of the tactical agents cuffed Miller, who didn't resist. He was completely broken, a pathetic shell of the swaggering bully who had pulled me over less than an hour ago. As they led him away, my eyes drifted back to the mangled wreck of my McLaren. My sanctuary. It was still a painful sight, but the anger had subsided, replaced by a weary sense of justice. The car could be replaced. The briefcase was secure. The mission was successful. And a corrupt cop who judged people by the color of their skin and the car they drove was about to learn a very hard lesson about underestimating a book by its cover. My cover,